And this is our title, Distance Times, Digital Tools and Competence, and it's part of our gathering today. And yeah, go ahead and show the Zoom link. I want to be sure people know how to control the Zoom platform a little bit. So on the next slide, you'll see how to unmute and how to keep your video off. There are those funny buttons that sometimes you have to hover at the bottom of the screen to find them, but you'll find it. There's also in the upper right corner an option to hit gallery view or speaker view. For the most part, it'll only be one speaker at a time, so it probably doesn't matter. You can just keep it on speaker view. And for the most part, generally when there's someone showing a PowerPoint, you just see one video at a time anyway. And you may have to hover your mouse various places to keep the dashboard pop up. You'll notice there's a chat box at the bottom, and I can show you on the next slide how to get to that. If you hit the next slide for us, Rola. Thank you. So if you hit the chat box, you'll see that you can message to everybody, or you can message to one person. If you're having trouble, message to me, I'm Patsy, or Andrea. So you'll see those two names and we can help you out. Otherwise, you can send to everyone in the meeting a greeting, and we'll take a moment in a second to find out who's here and where you're joining us from. And just a note that we are recording and that this will be shared. So if for any reason you want to change your name, do it now. Or if you don't want to keep your video off, that's totally fine too. All right, let's go ahead.
Okay, so I think I'm going to turn my video on now so you can all see me.
And if you don't know, this is Rola Naeb, and she is our incoming president for LESLLA. And I meant to say LESLLA is the host of this webinar and several others this week. If you don't know, LESLLA stands for Literacy, Education, and Second Language Learning for Adults. We are an international group of scholars and teachers and researchers and teacher educators and volunteers from around the world who work with students who are new to print literacy as well as language learners. And we've been going in one capacity or another since 2005, so a long time, but the board only got started a couple of years ago. And so I'm the current president, but for only a few more weeks, and then it's all Rola. She is our incoming president, and also joining us from the back end, let me introduce and have Andrea turn her video on. Andrea is our incoming vice president, and she is also helping with the tech today. So Andrea, if you're available to say hello, please do.
Hello, thanks for joining us this morning.
Yeah, and you'll see much more of Andrea tomorrow on another webinar. So if you in any way work with volunteers, you'll want to stick around tomorrow for another webinar. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Rola, who joins us from, where are you today, Rola? You're in Turkey, I think.
I'm actually in Istanbul. Yes,
where in the world is Rola?
Istanbul. Yes, I'm usually in the UK, in the northeast side of the UK, in Newcastle, but today I'm in Istanbul. So I'm joining you from Turkey. And it's so nice to have all of you here. I can see in the chat that we've got people from all over the world, like Croatia, Canada, Saudi Arabia, of course, US, UK. So it's really so nice to have all of you here. And good morning, good evening, wherever you are, whatever the time is there. So what I've got here is just a reminder of the objective of the webinar for today. So the first topic we'll be talking about, we'll be discussing today, is the importance of digital skills, competencies. What do we mean by this? And then we're going to move on to the challenges of integrating digital skills in a LESLLA curriculum or in the LESLLA classroom. Maybe also the challenges of the COVID-19 lockdown, if there are any challenges, the silver lining behind it as well. And finally, we will share like examples of resources and practice. But I won't be like doing this alone, so I'll have two more panelists and experts joining me. So the format of the webinar is that we will start with the introductions, and then we will talk about each of these topics for 20 to 25 minutes. And then please do feel free to share like any questions, any kind of comments, views, you've got experiences with us, either in the chat or just raise your hand, and we'll see how we can manage this. So I'm going to introduce the two panelists and myself. My name is Rola Naeb. I'm currently the Vice President of LESLLA. My daytime job is a senior lecturer at Northumbria University in the UK. I'm also the Program Director for the MA in TESOL and Applied Linguistics. I've been involved in technology-enhanced learning for most of my adult life, but my PhD thesis was on actually technology-enhanced learning as well, but it wasn't particularly with LESLLA learners. I haven't worked with LESLLA learners at that time, But since 2018 and 8, I've been involved like in research on LESLA learners, on like how to teach and how best to help and support LESLA learners and also their teachers. So I'll be talking a little bit from my experience in the 3 projects I've been involved with. And I'm so glad and happy to have 2 of the really good experts in digital technology, but in particularly with LESLA, in the LESLA environment, Jan Vanek and Jan Deutekom. So I'm gonna ask you, Jan, please to share your video and introduce yourself, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. I'm the Director of Digital Learning and Research at the EdTech Center at World Education. I've worked in the field of adult ESOL instruction and second language acquisition for 25 years. It's surprising how it gets bigger every year. And I recently, well, actually for about the past 10 years, I've been focusing my research and teacher education on building digital literacy skills of LESLLA learners and other adults with basic skill development needs, and also helping teachers understand how to use technology to support their academic instruction while simultaneously helping learners develop digital literacy skills. So thank you very much for having me here today.
Thank you very much, Jen. It's great to have you here. Jan, would you like to please share your video and introduce yourself?
Okay. My name is Jan Deutekom. I live in the Netherlands, and I've been a Dutch as a second language teacher for years, and I noticed that I wasn't that effective. I kept on working harder and harder, and my students kept on doing less and less. And then I decided to change it, I developed an idea about learning where students have resources to learn a language and learn a literacy, and I do that with students from vocational education. It's a small learning company. I work for a school, and we do this in the Netherlands, but also for other languages like English and German and Spanish.
Thank you very much, Jan. It's great to have you here, both Jen and Jan. What I would like to ask you to do for all the participants is, if you don't mind sharing with us where you're joining us from today. So I think in a minute or so, Andrea or Patty will share a poll with all of you. And if you don't mind just like clicking on where you're joining us from today, you can see, or if you'd like to write in the chat, it's fine as well, so we can know exactly where you're joining us from. You can see
the
that
options
North American,
here are very big, so feel free to be more specific in the chat
yeah.
box. All right, we have, I'll just give it a few more seconds. We have about 80% of people have voted. And some people are joining us from Raleigh, North Carolina, from Turkey, from Sweden, from Canada, DC. Great. I'm going to end the polling and share those results so you can see.
Okay, so majority from North America, with Europe and Asia as well. And it's so nice to have all of you here. I think what I would like to start with is, how do you view digital literacy? What exactly do we mean by digital literacy? And is it different from literacy? Is it digital skills only? Is it literacy skills we're talking about here? Is it digital competence? What exactly are we talking about here? Okay, and I'm going to invite Jan and Jen to share their views on this first before we start talking about the importance of these skills and what do we mean by this. Jen, would you like to start first, Jen?
Oh, certainly. So I chatted a link to a deck if anybody wants to follow along. And I just mentioned that now because I think when I think about digital literacy, I tend to fall back on the definition that has been provided for adult learning programs in the US to follow. Excuse me. And that's the definition of the American Library Association, which defines digital literacy as the ability to use information and communication technologies to find, evaluate, and communicate information. and that's requiring both cognitive and technical skills. That's a starting point for our work as educators. I think that beyond that, and especially in my work at the EdTech Center, we're now moving to stretch that toward a definition that encompasses also digital fluency and digital resilience, and articulating those things specifically because as we move through our day, we encounter situations where we have to use technology that is getting in the way of us accomplishing a habitualized task. And so we have to figure out how to use a technology in a new way, or to figure out how that technology works. And we need to do this fluidly. And we need to make sure that we're not stopped in our tracks when we encounter a situation where that application of technology is difficult. So that's the digital resilience. I have a colleague who works at Jobs for the Future, JFF Labs, who is talking about the collective importance of all organizations who support adult basic skills learners and adult ESL students, adult second language learners, no matter where they are. And that it's very important for us in whatever services that we're providing to make sure that we're giving people the opportunity to develop that digital fluency and digital resilience to succeed at the task at hand. So I'll pause there and
Thank you very much. Yeah. Jan, would you like to share with us like your view on what exactly we're talking about here today, like in terms of digital competences or skills or literacy?
Well, I see it as a part of a much larger thing. I think students, it's also got to do with I think we're living in a digital society.
Yes.
It will be harder and harder to function in this society. So we should have and to be able to have an active contribution to this society, you need to have digital skills. And not only skills, but also the attitude to use them.
Nice, okay.
But are you already talking about the importance of digital skills, or is it just what it is?
We can start, of course. You're one step ahead of us, because I think what we're going to do is, once we establish what we're talking about exactly here, we're going to move on to talk about, is it important? Is it part of a LESLLA curriculum? Should we teach it? Should we not? I think what I would like to do is like maybe end this section by saying, for example, summarizing what you and Jen have said about like digital skills and literacy. It's more or less what has been provided as the definition of digital literacy by the Council of Europe and Unesco as well as an organization. And it's the ability to function in a digitally enhanced or digitally functioning society these days. So it's not enough just to know how to read and write to be able to function in the society. You need more than that. And this is exactly, I think, more or less what you and Jen said encompasses the topic of digital skills or literacy. So I think we're moving one step now towards like the first topic of our webinar, and this is about like, is it important? And the question that is always coming up on like the LESLLA forum sometimes, and also asked by LESLLA teachers, is it our job to teach these skills? Should it be part of a LESLLA curriculum or of a literacy curriculum? And who should teach it? So Jan, if you want to go ahead and share your views on this, yeah.
Well, in this society, I think you need it. I think you need to be able to not only read and write, but also work with digital systems. I also think this society is changing. We're going from a society where we are told what to do to a society where there are goals, and there is much more choice. There are much more choices, and it's more and more up to us to make those choices instead of being told what to do. And I think in our teaching, we also need to have those kinds of choices, and we shouldn't. I don't think we should teach it specifically, but it should be a byproduct of what we do um, in our lessons. There should be so much digital tools and digital aspects that students will learn those digital things, so that they more or less automatically learn to cope with this material. And if we start using more and more digital tools, I think you don't have to put too much emphasis on teaching them those tools.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
Do that make sense?
Yes, I do. I think you're making sense. Although you don't have your video on, so you might want to share your video. So.
Okay.
Yeah. But yes, I think you do make sense. And I think what we've got is like in the chat box, Dominic is saying that whether it is our job or not to teach it as LESLLA teachers, or it's almost unavoidable that it will become part of our job. So I think we've got different views here on whether we should teach it or not. And I think it's good to hear what, Jen, what you think as well of this. And
yeah, I'm happy to build on that. So just to back up a tiny bit, because we're talking about LESLLA learners, I come from an SLA perspective that is a second language acquisition perspective that's highly informed by the idea of identity and legitimacy through use of a language. And in order for someone to feel fully legitimized, I think in their use of language, they have to have agency in accomplishing actions that are part of that language use. So if a learner, like a refugee, migrant, immigrant in any place in the world, doesn't have digital literacy skills, they are not able today to fully participate in the interactions that are required of them in schooling, in daily life, in economic integration. You know, so it is actually very important for us as LESLLA educators, researchers, teacher educators to make sure that we're creating a situation where LESLLA learners have an opportunity to develop digital literacy skills. I like the idea that these things are best accomplished when students actually use technology. I'd like to just trouble that a little bit by suggesting that in my research, I've seen that it is actually a very important step to have some explicit instruction on how to complete a task using that technology. But then teachers should quickly follow to application of those skills in other contexts, so that learners have transferable skills, not just understanding of a discrete digital literacy skill in a specific context. So the other thing that I want to say here, because we are talking about LESLLA learners, is that we cannot neglect the connection to language and technology use. Students need to be able to have the language they need to express comfort or ask questions, understand guidance on how to use technologies. And without some explicit instruction on that language, I think the cognitive load in trying to understand how to use a technology tool, understanding when it's appropriate, and then listening to cues and trying to make sense of all of that at one time is too much. So I suggest when you're introducing a new technology, that you pause and you actually do vocabulary, explicit vocabulary, and help students understand not only the context in which they're using that tool, but also the language that's required to talk about it.
Oh, very interesting. And can I just like take this further a bit, Jen, and ask, like, do you see this different from when you're introducing like a new topic or a new vocabulary or structure in language only classrooms? So do you see introducing a new technology as different to introducing in terms of the cognitive load you said? And
yeah, so I think as language teachers, we introduce vocabulary to help smooth the use of a teaching activity or a learning activity. We know that we need to give our students the language to participate fully. and to
Yeah.
support their legitimacy in the task. So this is really just an extension of that, where we need students to have the language to be able to use the technology tool that they need to deepen their academic learning or whatever it is they're doing. And I actually had, I did a talk on this at the Portland LESLLA.
Yeah.
And if you look at the proceedings, if you want to read more about the integration of technology into digital literacy learning, I encourage you to check on that, because I do actually draw on vocabulary frameworks, vocabulary instruction frameworks that are more commonly used in language learning.
Okay, thank you very much, Jen. And I think like Jan was talking about like introducing digital skills rather than as like part of a separate curriculum, but more as a result or as a byproduct of teaching language or doing whatever you're doing in the classroom using digital tools, and then digital literacy or digital skills will come as the byproduct of whatever you're doing in the classroom. Is that right, Jan?
Yes. When we started digitally in the Netherlands in, I think, 2017, a lot of teachers asked us, isn't it too difficult for literacy learners? And now I see, the last months, I've seen students making screenshots of what they accomplished, the same literacy students. So I think it's very important that in what we are doing, as almost automatically, we use computers, work with digital tools, and that makes it, I think, much easier for them to take the next steps. Teachers in the Netherlands had to start introducing things like Zoom or Teams with their students online, and it was only possible, I think, I'm convinced about that, because they were they made the first steps in using digital materials in classrooms.
All right. I'm assuming these learners you're talking about who took screenshots of whatever they're doing and shared it with their teachers, these were not told how to do this, right? They were not like taught.
They learned this online, because schools were from one day to the next day closed in the Netherlands, so we didn't have time to learn them how to use Zoom or how to use Teams. This was all done on the fly. This was done by teachers and some volunteers, I was pretty impressed with what teachers learned last months, but also what their students learned about working with digital materials.
Yeah, I think you're totally right there. I had to deal with like, I think 6 different platforms over the last month, and I consider myself like digitally literate, and still I had to learn like so many new platforms and manage them. But I think like what I find sometimes is the best approach to teaching digital skills is the same one I have with my kids. Like if you give them like a new phone, a new tablet, the best way to get them to know exactly what to do with it is to give them time to play around with it, and just they will automatically learn it. So I think, yes, these kind of skills can come as a byproduct of introducing like digital tools in the classroom. But at the same time, I think I agree with Jen that we need to introduce the vocabulary, we need to introduce them, because most of them, they come from different diverse backgrounds. And it's not that easy for all of them to step into that role and take this kind of ownership of learning how to use these skills. I can see a lot of comments in the chat, so I don't know if one of you, please, my helpers here, facilitators, co-hosts, if you can summarize what's going on there.
Sure, Andrea and I can try. There's a lot happening.
Exactly.
I did want to lift up one question that came up a little earlier, since we're focused on some of the things that are tricky, or the multiple meanings of words sometimes, or that it's hard to do the tech skills until students know about keyboard, mouse, screen, like even the basic words. But Janet asked a great question. What skills do learners already possess vis-a-vis digital navigation? Like what do they already bring to this endeavor? And I wonder if that's something the panelists could comment on while we continue to weed through the chat a little bit.
Of course, yeah. Jan, would you like to take this on? And then Jen, if you would like to follow this up, please. So what kind of skills do the learners bring with them to the classroom when they first join? Yeah. What kind of digital skills? Yeah.
Sometimes nothing. Sometimes they have never used a computer.
Yeah.
But I think being in a classroom and not a classroom with only starting students helps a lot for them to learn how to work with a mouse, to learn how to work with a keyboard. Even in the Netherlands, when Corona hit, it was first forbidden to, or the government said we won't pay for literacy students online classes, because they thought it was too much of a challenge. But there was a lot of protest because when students in classrooms already worked with digital materials, it wasn't too big a problem to make the next step. So it's a question from if sometimes there are no students know nothing about have no digital skills at all, but the learning curve is very high, I think.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much, Jan. Jen, would you like to take this forward? And
yeah, so I saw Janet's question, and I understood that to mean to be a cue for us to recognize that learners do come with skills, and we need to take time to understand what those might be and then build on them, and then also create opportunities if we eventually ever get back to classroom learning where we can help students help each other, so that complementary skills and skill gaps might be aligned and people can help each other learn. So I think that obviously there are assessment tools that are out there, like the North Star Digital Literacy Assessment, but that one's a little complicated because it assesses, for the most part, there are 3 small modules there, but for the most part it assesses discrete skills in a specific context. So it can give you a snapshot of a learner's skill. But I really think observing demonstrated use is the best way to understand what a learner can and cannot do, and ask them to talk about their skills too, and ask each other. And if we're in a multilingual setting, encourage people to talk in their home languages about about these skills. You know, especially if we're hoping that they'll sort of soak them up through the use of technology and completion of a learning task, then we really need to open the door to home language support in order to solve these like really quick technology problems and digital literacy problems, so they can move into that learning.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with both of you on this, and I actually agree with Allegra's comment as well in the chat about like the students, the LESLLA students bringing a lot of skills in terms of like using digital phones, social media, and navigating like on their phones with them to the classroom. But I think the question from my experience working with LESLLA learners in the UK is how useful are these skills in the classroom, when in the UK, at least like in some of the colleges, they are using like PCs. And even those who are quite skilled with smartphones sometimes struggle when they have to like navigate using the mouse and the screens, and like how to deal with the PC is a bit different because they're so used to the touch screens. They find it difficult to find like sometimes letters on the keyboard or to control the mouse properly. So I think I totally agree that they bring a lot of skills, and this is where maybe it's quite important for whoever is designing curriculum, whoever is like overlooking the creation of materials, to take this into account when designing like resources, tools for these learners. And I think like it takes us also to like further kind of questions about what is the best approach if we all agree that digital literacies and digital competences are quite important in the classroom and are quite important for LESLLA learners. Then, and I think we've already received like a question by email about what is the best platform, what is the best kind of approach to teach these digital skills, blended, synchronous, asynchronous, like online, offline, facilitated, not facilitated. I think I'd like to ask you, Jen, to go ahead because you've got quite an extensive research and experience in this area.
Also, there was a question about how to survey students that you haven't met, which I think is what is happening with a lot of programs right now, where they might have students joining that weren't doing in-person instruction previously. But how would you, maybe you could also address that, Jen. What would you recommend for surveying students that you haven't met to find out literacy and digital skills?
Yeah, so, okay, let me start with that one. I think, so we've been doing a lot of work since March at the Ed Tech Center and helping programs answer and teachers answer that question exactly. And I think the best idea is that we need to start with a common technology that we might know from experience or research that most students can understand how to use. And then from there, use that technology to leverage the use of subsequent technologies. Actually, at this point, can I mean, this is kind of what my slides are about. I wonder if I could just
Yeah, I can stop sharing my screen and then you can, yeah. Go ahead, yep.
Thank you.
And just to note that people can access these as well if you prefer to see them on your own screen or at another time. They've already been uploaded to the LESLLA website.
So, sorry, there are a few resources here up front that I'm not going to get into right away, but I want to go to this slide where I think the answer to that question actually depends on the context in which you're teaching. We might be working with students in a classroom. We might be working with students solely at a distance. In a blended learning model or hybrid or supplemental model. And these definitions are here, you can look into later. But you might also be working with learners in a remote face-to-face scenario where you're maybe hopping on a Zoom class with a group of students. So the first thing you need to understand is what are the affordances and constraints of the context in which you're teaching. Yeah. And when you start to think deeply about that, then you can start making decisions about how you're going to support some of these other questions. So this is the thing I want to draw your attention to right now. So these are things that we have learned over the past, what has it been since March? Months and months of struggling with this new shift and new way of thinking about teaching and learning. And we've been talking with teachers. I have a link here to a study of 1,000 practitioners that I collaborated with many other researchers in the US. And these are some of the things that we found. And one of the ones that was the most salient to me in this research is that, here, start with these familiar technologies. And we have found that most students have some familiarity with WhatsApp, and that WhatsApp has been a very effective bridge to link students to more learning. Teachers are using WhatsApp to create peer-to-peer support groups, and then also to communicate logistical information or technical support information about like a learning management system or how to get into Zoom. But there are actually fully developed cases of teachers using WhatsApp to support instruction. And I think I noticed that Nan Friedland is on this meeting, and Nan actually wrote a blog post for us at the Ed Tech Center on how she did just that, how she actually texted PowerPoint slides through WhatsApp and was able to run whole lessons that way. So I think as you start with a technology that you guess most students might have a facility with, you're going to see some of these digital literacy digital skills gaps that can help you understand how to provide proactive tech support or instruction as you layer in new technologies. So I'll leave it there, and I'd love to hear what Jan has to say about that too.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. Yeah. Yeah, Jan, would you like to take this further? Yeah.
Well, I saw with our teachers also that they started using WhatsApp. They already did that in classrooms before COVID hit us, and then went from there to using Teams to make it richer and give more possibilities. So I think this already working with WhatsApp helped a lot to get them working with things like Teams or Zoom. And I also hear that from other teachers in the Netherlands who started at the very beginning with WhatsApp when COVID hit us.
So I think the summary of what you and Jen has said as well is that when we start with familiar technologies, this will help us to introduce like new technologies. And both of you have got like evidence from research and practice to show that actually doing this is the best approach when you are not very sure about like what kind of skills these learners have. So start with the familiar, start simple as Jen has on her like slides, and then build on that to introduce new technologies and new tools. Yeah, I think I totally agree with you. I've got one thing just to say about this, and I actually, my mom is in a literacy class, so although she's not low literate, but she was put, because her English is quite low when she moved to the UK. So she was put in a pre-entry class in the UK. And since the COVID-19 lockdown, they started to use WhatsApp to share materials with the learners. But the way they were using it is that they were sharing links to things that are already on Moodle. So most of the students were not actually active in the group, and only you will see 1 or 2 people responding when the teachers and the like administrators send them reminders or like materials on WhatsApp. So I think it's quite important not just to use the tool, but to know how to use it effectively. So I think this takes us back to the question about like, is it like Jen said, for example, she gave examples like we share the slides themselves rather than the link where they need to log into a Moodle or to another like place where they need extra digital skills. So start with the simple ones and then move on to build on these ones. I think all of this takes us, I'm going to start sharing my screen again. Can I ask if there are like any burning questions in the chat before we move on to the next topic in our webinar for today?
I'm not saying burning questions, just a great deal of fantastic sharing that I think, I wonder if Ray and I and Andrea maybe can connect later and like get all of these links that are in the chat log and put them in a doc that we then upload, because I think people will want them. so
I think that would
keep
be
them coming
great.
and just know
Yeah.
you do not need to click and copy everything happening there. We will make that available to you.
Yeah, I'm already creating that document right now.
Oh, you're so good. Thank you, Ray.
Ray, you are our star. So for those of you who don't know, Ray is our communications board member, and she's been fantastic in getting LESLLA off the ground in terms of the website, social media. So she's our tech star. So we're going to move on now. I think we've already touched on this topic of like digital isolation, digital challenges, digital integration, and what we would like to talk about. And also hear your reviews in the chat. If you've got experience with this, is about like, do you think that lacking kind of like digital skills in a formal environment or in a formal learning environment has contributed to more isolation of the learners, or is it just a problem for refugees, migrants, adult migrants? Is it a problem for older migrants rather than young ones? Is it a problem in terms of like women who are not very familiar with the technology, but men are more familiar with it? Is it a new problem? I'd like to hear like what you, Jan, and Jen think about this. So shall we start with you, Jan?
Yes, well, I think we have lost some of our students in the last months, but I think mainly because I know of some teachers who hardly used any digital material in their classes, and I'm afraid we lost quite some of their students because it was very hard to reach them digitally, and they weren't used to digital material. I think there is a little difference between older and younger students and men and women, but I think the main reason is, did we confront them with digital materials when classes were still going on? And if we didn't, we lost quite a lot of them who were probably isolated and not working on their language and literacy skills.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much, Jan, for sharing this experience. Jan, what is your experience about like this digital isolation integration issue?
Well, I'll just briefly repeat. I think this comes down to, it's a very important question of agency.
Yeah.
And when we think about integration, we think about economic, civic, and linguistic integration into communities. And without digital literacy, it's really not possible to achieve all of that.
Yeah.
I think that refugees, we should not just assume that refugees are going to feel digitally isolated because they're newcomers to our communities. I did a couple summers, a two summer study in a charter high school in Minneapolis that has many students from the Horn of Africa who were recently arrived refugees.
Yeah.
And I did an interesting map. I had them do a social media map to put themselves in the middle and name all the social media tools that they are fluent with, and then label the language and groups of people that they use each one of those apps with.
Wow.
And they are incredibly flexible technology users in that regard. There were apps that that's when I first learned of TikTok. This was like 5 and 6 years ago. And actually WhatsApp too, I learned about WhatsApp through them. And so I think the challenge for us as teachers is to figure out how to leverage that comfort and fluency in order to use it to support deeper learning. To not assume that they are completely isolated because of technology. That being said, I think the most important issue here is actual access to the technology itself. It is true that I can speak to the US and US data. 97% of adults in the United States have access to a mobile device, and all but 15% of those can handle Wi-Fi. However, home broadband, home internet connection is unaffordable for many people who might also be LESLLA learners, and most people whose income is under $30,000 a year in the US are smartphone dependent. That means they can only access the internet through a free Wi-Fi connection and on their mobile device. So I'm not sure the isolation is about skills as much as it is about equitable access to the technology itself.
Very interesting. I think we've got also a comment from Nan that echoes more or less what you're saying as well, in terms of like she's saying that like forming the WhatsApp groups in the last hour of class before the lockdown helped continue the classes, but still this meant that some of the lowest literacy students were not able to understand the instructions, were not able to follow. And this might be also is like contributing to what Jan has said before about like losing some of the learners since the lockdown, because they were not able to follow the instructions or understand that the learning is taking place through these platforms, whether it is the WhatsApp or any other platforms they were using, the teachers are using.
Rola, I'm going to interrupt for just a moment. We had a great question for Jen. Or perhaps Jan, I'm not sure, of what is meant by agency.
Oh, yeah. So when I'm talking about agency, I'm talking about somebody having an idea about what they need to do and feeling empowered, or feeling like they have the skills, or that their solution is going to be viewed as an actual solution to that problem.
Thank you.
I think
this is sort of stemming from post-structural ideas about legitimacy and use of language. But you know, you're either your own agent, or you have to have someone support you in your agency, which means you're not quite doing it yourself.
So I think it's more about like what both Jan and Jen were saying about like taking ownership of what you want to do, how you want to do it, and familiarity with what you want to do and how you want to do it. Jan, would you like to take this further in terms of like, what are your views on this? So the main questions we were asking about like how we can leverage the knowledge that these learners bring, and try to minimize the digital isolation if it existed, like since the lockdown.
I don't know if I've got views on this.
Sorry, I didn't hear what you said, Jan.
I don't think I understand the question.
All right. So I think what you were saying is that, for example, you've lost some of the learners since the lockdown.
Yeah.
What can we do in order to improve the situation and close this gap between those learners who, for example, Nan was saying, like in her comment, that she had learners who didn't miss like a minute of 8 hours of instruction on WhatsApp, and others who haven't even joined at all because they didn't understand the instruction that WhatsApp is being used as a platform to deliver the learning. So what can we do in order to like reduce this gap between these two types of learners?
Well, I think we have an obligation from now on to start using digital materials in classes much more frequent and much more than we do now. I think it's very hard to get the lost students back, or you have to start visiting houses, which is still a problem in the Netherlands. I don't see how we can bridge the gap digitally. But I think it would be very difficult, or yeah.
Yeah, I think what all of this, like, yes, go ahead, Jan, please. Yeah.
I just want to add that in that survey I talked about, we had 1,000 respondents. Most of them were, about 2/3 of them were actual like classroom teachers. Yeah. And the rest were administrators. And it was very interesting to me that the vast majority were also employing non-digital instructional resources. So some, and you know, in really creative ways. So I think, you know, we, in my bias is that we integrate as much technology into instruction as possible, because we want to push learners' digital literacy skills while there are students, so that we can support their development. But when we need teaching and learning to happen around language or academic content, you have to do it in whatever way possible. And that might be paper packets that are mailed. If that is really the only way, then that's what you need to do.
Yeah, I think actually this is what happened in the case of like my mom's college in the UK, because they were not able to reach some of these learners. They started to post the materials to them in their homes. But again, I think this might not be the best approach, because you are talking about people who are not very familiar with even print materials. So even when they received the materials in the post, it wasn't that easy for them to continue their learning journey. So it's not a matter of just like digital skills to be able to access the ones on WhatsApp. Even the print materials were not that helpful for them at that stage. So I think what I want to share with you at this stage is more or less like some of the reports that echo what like Jan and Jen has been saying all the time about like this digital isolation, this digital kind of gap that exists. And the first one is like the European Commission report that was published in 2017 about like free digital learning opportunities for migrants and refugees. So this was called the MOOCs for Inclusion study. And what they did is that they started to evaluate what kind of free digital tools or learning materials are available for refugees and migrants, and how effective are they in terms of like helping these migrants to integrate, for civic integration, for formal engagement, informal and non-formal education and employment. And one of the main things that they found is that the lack of awareness of what is out there and the need for adaptation to diverse migrants, refugee profiles is the main issue. Because like among the target population, the awareness of what is out there is very low. And this applies actually to the learners and the teachers. Some of the teachers were not aware of the free tools that they could use, and most of the learners as well were not aware of the tools that they could use as well. And this is not just for language learning, this is to help them in integration in general and support their digital skills and digital literacy. So more or less it echoes what I've said before and what Allegra, Jen, and Jan have been saying. Yes, all of these learners, most of them, particularly the younger ones, they come with really kind of advanced skills in social media and mobile phones and smart and touch screens, but they do not necessarily use them for structured learning purposes. So usage of the language apps was the most common digital kind of like activity that they've done. I think very similar kind of like results and outcomes came from the UNESCO 2018 report. And this was not concentrated on like second language literacy learners. This was more like a global kind of study and survey on digital inclusion for low skilled and low literate people, even in their own countries. And what they found is that also, again, content localization lowers literacy related barriers to digital inclusion and adoption. And like, it was quite difficult for those who lack language literacy to be able to use technology, even in their own countries. So these are people who are able to understand the language and the vocabulary, but they're not able to read and write. So they found that this has affected so much their digital integration and participation in the society. What they also found is that, I think this is also my experience working with digital solutions and tools, and even sometimes the frameworks that exist for digital literacy for low literate learners, is that most digital solutions, they require like intermediate digital competencies and not only foundation ones. And here we're talking about like digital solutions that are used sometimes in formal, in most formal classrooms, LESLLA classrooms. Lack of awareness is again an issue, cost of access, and need for ongoing support. So all of these were kind of issues that more or less like widened the gap between literate and low literate or low educated people. And I think coming back to the question of whether this is like a matter or a question or a problem with refugees only or migrants, I don't think this is the case. And I think Jen referred at the start of her like discussion of this topic to some statistics from the US, and here are some actually from the UK. Like this is a recent study that was published in April 2020, and they found that actually 11.3 million people in the UK, they don't have the basic digital skills they need to get by in today's world. So we're talking about basic skills to function in the society with more than 11.3 million. They don't have these skills. 5.3 million, they don't have access or they're not users of the internet. So this is more than 10% of the adult population in the UK. So I think the question of whether this is like a refugee, migrants issue, it's not. That's why it's important to focus on digital skills in the LESLLA classroom. And I think this is what we all agree on. But I think what we would like to maybe invite the participants to also like share with us is their experiences, if they are like teachers, about challenges that they've experienced since the lockdown. And again, Jan and Jen, if you'd like to share your experience about whether there were specific challenges other than, for example, having lost some of the learners because they were not like responding to WhatsApp messages or like understanding what's going on. Would you like to go ahead, Jen?
So I can go first and maybe I'll share my screen.
Oh, right, yeah. Let me just stop.
So as I mentioned before, it's really important to think about these things in terms of the instructional approach and the context in which you're teaching. You know, through the survey, through some of my other work on writing a blended learning guide, which you can access here, and talking with literally hundreds of teachers as we've been offering weekly, sometimes twice a week, professional development webinars on these topics. You know, here, I guess the strategies, if you reverse them, are also the challenges. So teachers struggled if they tried to integrate too much technology at the same time. They couldn't keep up, the learners couldn't keep up. It was too hard to learn both content and technology simultaneously. Having too much teacher talk in any setting is too much, and especially if you're in a Zoom class. So, you know, really important to make sure that learners have some social presence in whatever setting, whether it's in an online space that's asynchronous or synchronous, the learners have to see each other. Really important to not flood learners with a list of technologies. Put it all in one place. If you're going to use more than one thing, have a digital, what I call a digital homeroom. So use Padlet or a technology called Wakelet, Google Sites, Weebly, or something like Canvas. We'll get it all in one place. Another thing that we saw was that teachers had kind of forgotten about their effective classroom strategies for language learning, like role play and comprehension checks and small group work, because they were really worried about how the technology would impact that. But with some careful preparation and planning and use, like for example, with the case of role play, with use of a lot of visual cues, you can actually do role play and dialogue and scripted dialogue for language learning, even in Zoom. Comprehension checks are very important, as we all know, but muting and unmuting, or getting 10 students to mute and unmute at the same time in a Zoom classroom can be very chaotic. So one teacher that I talked to actually created a solution called Hanswers, like the English word hand plus the English word answer put together. And so she would put her screen on gallery mode and ask a question and have a slide that would have a number, and the students would respond with their fingers to answer the question. That way everyone could stay muted, but she could do a comprehension check. And then of course, small groups in Zoom is important. I want to just say too that the teachers that really succeeded were the ones that had a supportive mindset around all kinds of support. So not only technology support, like providing access to laptops or devices, but also affective support that led into exploring learner need around food and healthcare and housing. And those teachers were able to bring all of that into their instruction. And these are really for teachers. These are like for teachers' mental health and success with this kind of like teaching in the pandemic. I think it's very important to stay flexible. Students are under more stress than usual. You know, they're either working more than one job, or because they're taking care of their children who are home, or they're experiencing great economic peril because they are not working anymore. So it's really more important than ever to figure out ways to drive learner-centered opportunities. Collaborate with your colleagues. Teachers who work alone in these settings struggle because it takes more time to learn how to teach in a new approach. So make sure that if you're, if your program or maybe your government organization isn't providing opportunities to collaborate, which I'm sure they are. I know they are in Minnesota. Make sure you create that network for yourself. You can't work alone and do well. And, also just be good to yourself and be flexible and forgiving. So I know these aren't challenges, but these are things that I've seen successful programs do in the way they talk about their work. So I hope that's helpful.
I think it's very helpful, and I think it's quite important that we take note of all of these things. And I think many of the participants were sharing like good experience about how COVID-19 affected their learners. But I'm gonna let Jan first go ahead and share his experience before I pick up some of these experiences to share.
Well, I think I've seen the last months, I've seen wonders. I've seen teachers really learning a lot about what needed to be done, but also arranging laptops for their students and bringing them to their homes. I think our teachers had a big advantage that they had good digital, or at least what I think, good digital material, so their students could really work also for themselves. And I think what teachers found difficult in the beginning is they tried to do their lessons online, which is very tiresome, I think. And teachers who really did a good job, I think, made small groups of students learning together and talked to those students for maybe 10-15 minutes, and the students could show what they achieved. So that the organization of their classes students were working on themselves with digital material, and then teachers would talk to them about what they achieved and gave them new goals. And teachers who did that I think did a really good job.
Yeah. It's quite good to hear all of these experiences. I think we've got like two. I've picked two, and I'm sorry for all of those. So I haven't managed to read everything on the chat, but I've picked like on Katrina's experience from Scotland. And she said like at the start, what she did is that she asked one of the higher level students to record the video about how to use Zoom. And in the, I'm assuming in the language, in the home language of the some of the migrants, and then she shared it with them, and they all now know how to use Zoom. And actually, she managed to get like 5 more moms to join Zoom who were not able to join before because they didn't have childcare. So they are joining the classes now, and teaching is and learning is taking place as expected. And then we've got like Allegra, who's got this kind of teacherless Zoom room where they created like a Zoom room for the learners without any of the teachers there. So they can meet, they can discuss the homework, they can keep in touch with each other. And it seems to be working quite well as well with the learners. I think Patsy and Daria, are there any examples, burning questions from the chat? Because there is a lot of going.
There's a lot happening, Rola.
Yeah.
This is clearly an important topic, and I'm just so struck by so much. You know, it's just, I'm going to turn my video on here for a moment. Like so many interesting things that people are doing and trying, and I'm always impressed by the innovation of LESLLA educators, but this is, I'm blown away. I'm just blown away. So lots of interesting things, and I know you're not probably able to keep up with everything in the chat. There's almost 70 people in this, and they're all actively chatting. So we are compiling all of those, so just know that. But some really interesting comments around the interplay of health literacy and telehealth appointments and digital literacy and language and the complexities involved with that. And Maricel and Monica offered some resources around that. The teacherless Zoom is getting lots of snaps, so that's very interesting. Thank you from Allegra in Pittsburgh, who ran our conference last year. I know other things have been shared as far as like language specific, how to download Zoom to your phone. Like I know we've done some recordings of that in Minnesota. I can try and find some of those. If you have similar resources, like how to put Zoom or Google Meets or whatever it is that you're using in multiple languages on a video form, I hope you'll share those as well. I know the health department in Minnesota, and I'm sure other places, have done a number of multilingual videos about the virus, less so of course about this specifically. So lots of interesting things being shared. I hope people are able to keep up. If not, look for all of that in our website soon. I am going to just give you a time check. We're at 11:35, so you have about 25 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Patsy. Thanks a lot. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to share my screen again with you. And apparently, I think what we all agree now, having heard like what Jen and what Jan and what all the participants have been sharing with us, is that yes, there's been some challenges, but actually there are also a lot of opportunities for us to improve the provision, to get like learners more involved who were not able to come. So there is a lot of like pros to the COVID lockdown that more or less closed the digital kind of divide that existed before COVID-19. So I think what I also want to share with you is some of the solutions, and these are solutions that were and reports that came out before the COVID-19 lockdown, but actually they are very, like the recommendations, the kind of opportunities, solutions they offer are quite like relevant to today's world as they were at the time of publication. So for the European Commission report, what they said is that the most important thing is that whoever is designing materials, tools for learners, for LESLLA learners, particularly for migrants and like refugees in deprived places where they don't have access to technology, it's quite important to have this fit for purpose design. So targeted, blended approaches are the most effective way to engage them. And at least in formal education, adapting the initiative to the learner's characteristics and environment. So because language learning is the priority for most of these refugees and learners, so you need to integrate this digital kind of skills into a learning environment, a language learning environment, because this is where their focus will be. Otherwise, this kind of idea of agency that Jen was referring to, because it's not their priority, it's not like what they want to do at this stage, they might not be quite engaged. I think the other one is like the importance of recognition, having any kind of recognition, formal, informal badges, social kind of badges, and ensuring sustainability in terms of like the providers of the technologies and the tools. Like, so make sure that whatever kind of platforms you're using, you will be able to maintain. You don't want to change the platforms all the time. You don't want to change tools and introduce new ones out of a sudden. So these are some of the main kind of like recommendations. And then from the UNESCO's one is just kind of like experiment with the possibilities offered through new and advanced technologies, and like stimulate both the supply and demand sides of service. So this is more about like collaborating, the importance of collaborating between the private, the civic, and the state and government sectors in order to improve provision, particularly for those with low levels of skills and literacy. And not just necessarily for refugees and migrants. This applies to all kind of like citizens. Give attention to digital solutions as key elements in creating like a more literate environment. And I think what I want to share is one of the projects I've been like involved in recently, and this came out of all of the research as well that's been done by LESLLA teachers and researchers on the importance of having like kind of descriptors and frameworks that support the teachers, that guide them. So this is a project that is funded by the Council of Europe. And what we're trying to do is, if you're familiar with the CEFR, so the Common European Framework of Reference, that is used across Europe for more or less designing curriculum materials, sometimes assessment. So what we've been doing since 2018 is trying to create a similar framework, similar kind of reference guide for teachers, but that focuses only on the LESLLA learners. And we made sure that part of this kind of framework, a reference guide, we have digital skills. So we've got digital competences and digital skills as part of this curriculum. And we've got like, we divided this into 4 kind of areas, which we thought are quite important skills that LESLLA learners will need to have as part of their formal education. Or informal education. So for example, safety, managing information, technical kind of skills, managing navigation, mouse, touch screens and things like this. And also like content creation and handling information. So all of these kind of like, I think the importance of digital skills and digital literacy as part of an inclusive approach, holistic approach to LESLLA teaching and learning is increasing across the world. And just judging by the kind of resources and links that were shared by all the participants, it's quite obvious that people are more like teachers, learners, everyone is more aware of how important this to function in today's society. So I think already most of this has been done like in the chat in terms of sharing of the resources. But what I would like to do is to give Jan the chance to share some of the resources that he was working on, he created. And then Jen is gonna also share some of the resources that she thinks are quite useful for LESLLA teachers and learners. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. And if you would like to start, Jan.
I'll try.
Yeah.
Are you able? There you go. Yeah, we're seeing it.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Do you see my screen?
we do,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, this is digitally the English one. We have also one in Dutch and several other languages. Well, I'll just start well, you see here all sections of the program. I'll start with the ABC part, which is the very start of literacy learning. This is list 1. These are the words, and you can click on everything. So here you can
map.
You can hear the word. Here you can see a picture of it, and here you can and here you can hear the individual. Can you hear the sound? Yes.
Yeah, we can hear it. That's fine.
Okay, so this is more or less an introduction of the words of the specific list. When we started developing this 2 people said, well, this isn't an exercise, but we know of students who work who've worked 45 minutes with this specific resource, and at the bottom you can see the sound bar where you have all the sounds. And then you get all kinds of exercises. Most exercises have a clock and a counter here.
Mill.
And there is immediate feedback. So once I do it wrong, you can see that it falls back. So it's and you can do this exercise on different levels. You can use those buttons, but if you don't need it, you can only use the complete word. And we see a lot of interesting things happening here, because first you see students work their way down, but then they see, well, there are more A's here, so they start looking. So they start looking for it, and so they start using all kinds of strategies to solve this. We say to students that they should be able to do this in 2.5 minutes with 0 mistakes. And the fun thing is, students really like this. It's a challenge for them, and I've seen students do this 9-10 times in a row to make sure they got this challenge. Well, this is the first exercise. Here's another exercise.
Sit. Map.
And once you do it wrong, it will fall back. And we see students are very happy to use this material. They like being challenged. They have to get used that you don't do this once, but that you have to repeat it. They fill in forms doing this, and they see that they are progressing. They make less mistakes. They do it faster. And these exercises get more, or the exercises where you see this little icon you can do on the phone. This is another exercise. And the goal is, in the end, that they're able to read and write those words. The most difficult one is probably listen and type, where
Still.
and even there on letter level, you can see mistakes. In this exercise, well, we thought in the beginning, well, if they work on this for 5 minutes and they still make several mistakes, it's no problem. But teachers started telling us, well, they do it in 3 minutes with 0 mistakes. So students are surprising us by working with the material, and they achieve much more than we figured possible. This is probably the favorite one.
Sit.
Here you have to
Mat. Mop.
to click on the right word, the word you hear,
Mop.
and here you see also badges, 3 stars, if you do this within a minute and with 0 mistakes. We work on this with a small team, but we get a lot of feedback from teachers who are following us and who are asking for new things to make. This is the very lowest level. If we go further, you have also reading text. I'll show you this one. You can hear the complete text.
Luke is a farmer.
You can click on the
Luke is farmer.
Individual words, and the green words have pictures. We think there's a lot of byproduct. You learn words here because they come up in the text. In the ABC parts, students learn what words mean without being specifically asked to learn them. Okay, what more can I say? Have I said enough, Rola?
I think you did, and I think this is quite an useful resource, not because I was involved in developing it only, but because I think it's quite important. I think the point that Jan was trying to convey is that although we started this kind of project with language learning in mind at the start, what we discovered when we trialed the materials, and by the way, the materials are available in 5 different languages. Is it 5 or 6 now, Jan?
5. 5 for the ABC part.
Yes. So the ABC part, which is the focus of it, is the grapheme phoneme correspondence to help improve the decoding skills of LESLLA learners. So the whole program, all the materials were developed with LESLLA learners in mind, in terms of the vocabulary used, the pictures even we used, and the simplicity of the technology and the navigation around it. What we expected at the start is, for example, that the learners will take like 5 minutes to do one of the activities, and we were surprised that they only took maybe 2 minutes. After like once or twice trying this resource, they were able to do it in 2 minutes. They were able to develop strategies to cope with it. So I think the whole discussion or the whole debate about like the ability of those learners to manage technology in a learning environment is actually quite sometimes misleading, because they are able to deal with technology. They are able to deal even with technology that is not just mobile friendly or on touch screens. I think this is one of the resources we wanted to show you in order to demonstrate how LESLLA learners in the classroom are using technology. I think I'm going to move now to Jen, because she's got a lot of resources. Sorry, Patsy,
I just have a quick clarification.
Yes.
For Jan before we move on. There's a question as to which software was used to develop the program, and then also if there are higher levels than what you demonstrated.
We are working up to B1.
So B1 in the Common European Framework of Reference. Yeah.
I have a learning company with students who are trying to become programmers, and the software behind this is all developed by those students.
Okay, great, thank you. And I know we are short on time, so I'll let you go to Jen. Thanks for clarifying.
Thank you very much, Patsy. Yeah, I think Ines has also shared like her thesis, which was investigating like the effectiveness of the software of the platform, of the Digital platform. It's currently available for free in 5 different languages, and I'll share in the chat screen like a link to our Facebook page if you would like to follow. I'll move on now to Jen, who has like multiple resources that you would like to share with us, which are quite impressive and useful. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. I had a little bit of a larger a step back, and when I heard the word resources, I was thinking about instructional resources rather than learning material. So I just want to share some links if you're looking for more direction or support in figuring out how to take something like that great tool that Jan demonstrated and how you might use that in instruction, how you might deliver any of these approaches that I introduced earlier. Please visit I mean, this has been helping keep programs and teacher support since the pandemic has been the focus of my work since early March. And we have a really nice archive of resources from webinars that we've been doing. And also this page here, the tips for distance learning, actually has links to many free learning resources that you could integrate into your instruction. I just want to point out that our next webinar is actually on Friday, and we will be featuring actually Literacy Minnesota and Pro Literacy, who will both share strategies for integrating volunteers into your remote instruction. So please do register for that. Before the pandemic even started, we had, and then also along with that, we're offering small group and one-on-one coaching on specific topics for teachers who are looking for some more customized guidance. So there's a link here. You can register. The next coaching session is actually going to be around designing a Weebly website. If you would like to join that, please check out the coaching link here. And then we've also been running mobile learning, technical assistance and professional development. We have a mobile learning resource site to help you understand how to set up a program that maximizes the reach of what you can deliver through mobile learning. So lots of really excellent materials and resources and strategies that have come from teachers and program admin that would be useful, I think, in both national, internet, US and global contexts. And then we have a webinar coming up on the 19th that's going to talk about how you might evaluate an online learning resource and decide whether or not you should integrate that into your instruction. Also in this PDF, I've got, we do have some free special topics courses that anyone can register for. We have an introduction to using open ed resources, introduction to mobile learning, introduction to blended learning, and super easy to get into those courses. You just follow the e-learning actually I can chat this one because I'm not in presentation mode. So you can just feel free to check out the course and sign up and see what you think of them. They take about 2 hours each to get through, and they're totally free. The last thing I want to just highlight, and this is not ready yet, but it's coming. We got a grant from the U.S. Department of Education, the OCTE, it's the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education, to create self-paced open access professional development modules on the topics that you see on the screen. And I'm working furiously on writing the content for those right now, and would love to share a link to the website where we host those, and it'll be available September 30th. Again, I'm making these as like Lego bricks. If you imagine Lego bricks and little pockets of learning, little learning objects that anybody can just pick up and put into their own learning management systems in whatever way works for them, completely free. So look for more information on that. And if you want to reach out, this is my email address. I'd love to follow up on any of this. And thanks again for letting us share our work.
Thank you very much for sharing your work, Jen and Jan. Really, it's quite important. I'm sure people are like impressed with all you've done, all of you. And I think what I want to say, I think there is a lot of like resource sharing that took place also in the chat. There is a lot of like links on Jen's slides as well. All of these will be available later on our website, but also in the document that Ray has kindly said that she's going to compile all these resources and links, and then we will forward it to all members and non-members on our. How are we going to share it, Ray?
So
so I've already linked a Google Doc in the shared folder for the conference. So it's under the annual symposia on our website, and Patsy maybe can drop that link in there once more, and it's already all in there.
Perfect.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Very fast. We have already have your slides, Rola, in PDF form, and Jen's slides are in there, as well as quite the synthesis document that Ray's been typing while everyone's been chatting. That's already there as well, and we'll keep adding to it with other work that comes up this week.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you very much, Patsy and Ray, for keeping everything under control. I think what I want, it's been great, I think, having like Jan and Jen here and having all the contributions from all the participants. I didn't expect that we're going to have as many participants as we had today, and I'm really impressed by all the resources shared by the panelists and the participants as well. I'm just going to ask, like, if you were monitoring the chat, Patsy and Andrea, if you've got any final remarks, questions before we end the session.
Yeah, let me just see. Andrea, anything that you're seeing? I'm mostly seeing a lot of very happy thank yous to all of you who spoke today and to everyone for sharing resources. Anything else, Andrea?
Lots of thank yous. I mean, there was just so much that came up in the chat, really excellent resources and people sharing personal experiences. So I'm definitely glad that we're going to be able to capture all of that for everybody.
Yeah, that was a lot of quick sharing that happened. So thank you to everyone who typed in or chatted in, and we are eager to share that with the field. Thank you so much. We are full of smarts here at LESLLA, so thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm going to reiterate this and say thank you very much to Jen and Jan for sharing your rich experience with us today. It's been really a pleasure having you here and listening to your experience and your wisdom. And I think just a couple of reminders about like the next session, which is taking place tomorrow, but I'm going to hand over to Patsy.
Sure.
And, yeah.
Yeah, so there are 2 more sessions for our virtual gathering this week. One is in Swedish. We were, of course, supposed to be in Malmö, Sweden this week, and that did not happen. But there is a session nod to our colleagues in Sweden who worked so hard to put that conference together and who will be hosting it next year. But that is happening tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock my time, but it's 3 o'clock in Sweden. And that one, of course, will be in Swedish, just a heads up. And then using volunteers to support LESLLA teaching and learning from a distance is at this time tomorrow. With Andrea Eckelberger, who you heard from today, and she's with Literacy Minnesota, as well as several panelists who will share. I mean, it just strikes me too that when we're talking about a digital learning environment, how vital volunteers are. And there's a lot to know and to juggle when working with volunteers in the best of circumstances. And so they'll share some of their insights on how we're able to make that work in a LESLLA pandemic environment. So tune in for that tomorrow.
Perfect. I'm just putting like my email in the chat box as well, in case anyone has got any further questions, inquiries about the session, or if you'd like to send us your feedback about the session as well. Please do just like get in touch, and I'll be happy to respond to whatever questions you might have, because I forgot to put it on the slides.
No problem. Thank you, Rola. It's also, of course, on the website, so
yeah,
on the Board of Directors page.
Yeah.
And the conference next year, since we weren't able to go this year, we are just going to have it next year in Sweden, and that will be August 11th through 13th. In Malmö, which is across the bridge from Copenhagen. So you have a year to brush up on your Swedish before that. It strikes me too, as so many great ideas were shared in the chat box, that the call for proposals will be out in the winter, and be thinking what you can share, because there is a great deal of expertise in this call and lots of important things happening between now and then that I hope you'll think about sharing at the symposium next August.
I think also a final reminder, if you're joining us and you're not yet LESLLA members, please do consider joining. You will find all the information on our website. And it's not just because like LESLLA is a great organization, and it's not because I'm the incoming president and Patty is the outgoing president. It's because of all this kind of sharing of materials, sharing of practice, and we would love to see you in Malmö next year.
Yeah. And maybe Ray or Andrea can drop the become a members thing into, somebody's already
They're
over
quite
it.
fast.
Ray's already all over it. Yeah, if you aren't already, we have a tiered membership, so give what you can to contribute to this organization. We'd love to have you. Thank you. And I'm told that in Swedish, thank you is tack. So there you go. You have one word. Yeah. And of course, materials not only shortly will be posted, they're already there because we're that fast. All right, I want to just give a final thank you to Rola and Jen and Jan, if you'll go ahead and turn your cameras back on, as well as Andrea, who helped us out. And Ray, if you're willing, we'd love to see you, since you were doing so much work on the back end of things here today. Thank you so much. We're just so grateful for the team.